Wanted to do a little demo introducing the first exercise and talking about our paper and our markers. So on the subject of our markers, you have something, if you bought the kit or are getting the kit, you're going to get something called a clear colorless blender, which could look like that, or it could look like that. These are simply markers with no blender. I mean, blenders or markers without pigment, I should say. So if I actually use this on the paper, this is a brush tip, by the way, which is okay for rendering. I kind of prefer the wedge tip, which like that, which you see right here. But that's fine. Either one will work. And then of course they have a fine tip as well. I lay down this blender, and you can see I have no tone as I do this. So basically, we use the blender usually to start very light areas. We also use it principally for blending between 10, 20, 30, and 40% tones. As you get into 30, 40, you're going to start shifting downshifting to 10 and 20 as your blender. Talk a little bit about that as we go. But basically, a lighter tone blending a darker tone is the way this works with markers. So markers are by nature both a wet and dry media. They're wet when they go down, but they dry in about a minute, which means they're reworkable. Unlike watercolor, where you can't really go back in without creating a mess. Those of you who worked in watercolor know exactly what I mean. Markers you can go back into. So I'm taking a 10, for example, and while that paper is still wet, and that actually worked out pretty nicely. But a little bit of unevenness, I go back in and say, hit that transition area right here with the blender again, and I've now got a blend of 0 to 10. That will dry to 0, back to the white of the paper. Always looks a little darker when it's wet. As you proceed, you're actually going to go forward like this. 2 steps is what I usually do. So I'm actually taking a 10, and then I'm going to shift to, actually this is my 10, I'm going to shift to 20 actually right here. So I'm actually, if you line this up 20 to 30, I'm actually using 20 over these 2 areas. The way markers work is they tend to do best when you have, say, 3 markers in your hands like this. Usually the marker I'm primarily using and the other 2 neighboring markers, lighter and darker. And that means I can quickly access the neighboring tones and take this blender, for example, and see how I'm softening that sudden transition. Markers are made to be workable while they're wet. So because that paper was still wet, I had the luxury of being able to go in and do things like this. Just drop a little bit of tone in, and then just use the blender or a lighter marker to push it around and let the paper do its work of blending. So you're going to draw a box 2 inches high and 11 inches long, and mark off tick marks every inch, and write down your percentages across. I'd actually draw 2 of these boxes, one up here, one down here. Before you actually render in here, so you're going to have a clean open box, I want you to just test render part of the gradation. Get used to using the markers. Start with light, move towards dark. Now it is possible, and some students do this successfully, they start with 90 and then they work lighter. But it's always in marker, it's transparent media, it's always easier to darken than it is to lighten. We are not using our colored pencils at this point. We're doing everything with markers. Another thing about the paper, you notice I have this set on white backing. I'm going to suggest that if you can invest in a pad of 11 by 17, not a pad, but actually a packet, go to Office Depot or even, Office Depot, one of the supply stores, and just have a ream of 11 by 17 copy paper for whatever they're charging, $8, $9. And use it to backlight, or not backlight, but back up your paper. If I take this paper and put it over here, you can see that my tones don't show as well, and I've got a dark board. I can't assess those tones accurately. You need a nice white background. The other thing is, you can see I've got a stain. You're going to be moving this around as you render. This will be true for our entire 16 weeks. So this piece of paper should be cheap. and expendable. You're just going to throw it out and replace it with another one, and keep moving your paper around as you do this, because this marker paper is designed to be very thin and specifically to receive this marker very well, but that means it goes through also very efficiently. Another thing I'm going to recommend, don't just open up your pad and start markering on the top sheet, because this will go through and ruin 4 sheets just like that. So just a word of advice there.